Welcome back to the Horror Shack. Tonight, we'll explore true horror stories for sleep that will keep you on the edge of your seat. But first, we would love you to comment where you're listening from and what time is it currently for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-tingling episodes. Now let's get comfy. Story 1. The Briarwood Creature by Michael Harris. I'll be honest, I never thought anything like this would happen to me. In fact, I used to laugh at people who claimed they saw strange things, at least until that night. There's a lot of things I could say about Briarwood, where I live, but one thing's for sure. It's supposed to be one of the safest places around. It's quiet here, peaceful. Nothing too strange ever happens. It's the kind of place where people mind their own business, wave to each other when you drive by, and you can go weeks without hearing anything that'll shake you. But I'll tell you this now. Something was out there that night. Something I'll never forget. It was just after 2 a.m. I had just gotten off the phone with my cousin who lives in the city, and I was sitting in the living room, a few dim lamps on, nothing fancy. The whole house was quiet except for the sound of the clock ticking. I was alone. My wife had gone to bed early, and I had the house to myself. I was just scrolling through my phone, the usual. No big deal. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, I saw something moving outside my window. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was just a stray animal or maybe a raccoon. It's common around here. But the more I looked, the more it didn't make sense. You know that feeling you get when your gut just tightens for no reason? That feeling that something's just off? Yeah, that's when I felt it. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I leaned closer to the window, squinting. I could make out a shape, but it was hard to see clearly in the dark. It looked small and weird, not like any animal I'd ever seen. The way it moved, I couldn't even describe it. It was jerky, unsteady, like it was struggling to walk. It wasn't right. I didn't even know what I was looking at. I stood there for a second, frozen, trying to make sense of it. Was it some sort of mutated animal? A bizarrely deformed dog? My mind was racing, trying to figure out what it could be, but nothing made sense. And then it did something that made my blood run cold. It looked up. I couldn't believe my eyes. It wasn't like any animal I had ever seen. It had these glowing eyes. Not like the reflective eyes of an animal in the dark. No, these were bright, almost unnatural. They were red, glowing like some sort of flashlight, too bright for my porch light. It felt like they were staring straight into my soul, and I couldn't look away. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to move, wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't budge. It just stood there staring back at me, almost as if it was waiting for something. I finally snapped out of it, breaking my trance. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and tried to take a picture. But by the time I looked back out the window, it was gone. Just disappeared. I rushed outside, half expecting to find something, anything, but the yard was empty. Was I imagining it? Maybe. Maybe I was just tired, stressed out from work, and my mind was playing tricks on me. That's what I told myself. But then I noticed something. There were footprints. It wasn't just any footprints, though. No. These looked like they came from some sort of animal, but they were different. The prints were clear in the mud beside the house, where the grass was thin and the dirt was soft. I knelt down, my breath catching in my throat as I looked at them more closely. They looked like dog prints, but no, something was off. They had 6 toes. At that moment, I felt my stomach drop. The hairs on my arms were standing straight up, and I could feel the sweat on my palms. This wasn't normal. What the hell had I just seen? What was going on? I didn't know what to do. I didn't know who to talk to. But I knew I couldn't just ignore this. So I called the police. They didn't take me seriously at first, to be honest. The dispatcher on the other end of the line probably thought I was some half-awake man just making up stories. But I told them about the footprints and the glowing eyes, and they eventually sent an officer over to take a look. But by the time he arrived, whatever it was had already vanished. No sign of it. No creature lurking in the yard. Nothing. Just the footprints. Those damn six-toed footprints that haunted me every time I looked at them. The officer was just as confused as I was. He looked around the property, didn't find anything out of the ordinary, but still, he made a note of the strange prints. The thing is, no one could explain it. Not the officer, not the town, not even the local experts. It was like the creature just appeared and then vanished, as if it was never there at all. But that didn't explain what I had seen, what I had felt, that thing outside my window, those glowing red eyes. I couldn't shake it. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see it, as clear as day. I thought about it every night after that, wondering if it would come back. And I wasn't the only one. I didn't sleep much after that night. How could I? Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the window, every shadow that moved just outside the corner of my vision sent my heart racing. I told myself it was just my nerves. Maybe I was imagining things. After all, Briarwood was a quiet town. There were no real threats here, right? But every time I thought about that creature, the way it moved, the way its eyes shone like headlights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching me, waiting. The days passed, but the unease never really left. I'd walk out onto my porch in the morning to grab the newspaper, and there was always a moment where I would glance around nervously, half expecting that creature to be standing just beyond the edge of the woods, its glowing red eyes staring straight at me. But it wasn't there. Every time I checked, nothing. But then came the night that changed everything. It was a week after the police had come to my house. The reports had been filed, the footprints noted, and the whole thing had been written off as some odd freak occurrence, maybe a deformity in some wild animal, they said. Everyone had moved on. Well, almost everyone. I still couldn't shake it though. That feeling of being watched. That creeping, unsettling sense that I wasn't alone in the house. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the police weren't going to do anything, I would figure it out myself. I pulled out my old camera, an old, bulky thing I hadn't used in years, and started setting up along the edges of the property. I knew that if I saw it again, I would need proof. I didn't expect to get much, but something told me I had to try. Maybe if I had a picture, someone would listen. The night was colder than usual, with a heavy fog hanging over the town. It wasn't unusual to see mist rolling through Briarwood at night, but this felt different. Thicker. I could barely see past the end of my porch. I felt my skin prickle as I set the camera up, the red LED blinking in the darkness. I sat in the kitchen, watching the screen. The house was still, but there was something about the silence that made my skin crawl. I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see those eyes again. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I was going crazy. But as I stared into the fog, I saw something move. At first, it was just a blur. I squinted, trying to make it out. There was no mistaking it now. Something was out there. It wasn't a dog or a raccoon. It was moving, strangely like before. I felt that same dread fill my chest, that same tightness. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the camera and rushed outside, careful not to make any noise. My feet crunched against the gravel, but I kept moving toward the edge of the yard. The fog was so thick now I could barely see where I was going. It was like the world had shrunk to nothing but mist and shadows. Then I saw it. It was standing there, just outside the yard. It wasn't far, maybe 20 feet away, but the fog made it hard to see clearly. It was bigger than I remembered. Its body seemed even more misshapen, more wrong. The creature's 3 legs were bent at unnatural angles, making it look like it was in constant pain. It had that same jerky, twitchy motion like it couldn't control its own body. But this time, its eyes were different. The red glow was brighter, almost like it was burning. I couldn't tell if it was getting closer or if the fog was just making it seem that way, but I swear it was staring straight at me, as though it knew I was watching. I froze, the camera shaking in my hands. My heart pounded in my chest. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. I stood there, paralyzed, caught in its gaze. And then something else happened. I heard a noise, a scraping sound. It came from the house. I snapped my head around, but there was nothing there. No wind, no animals. It was silent. The fog pressed in around me, swallowing up everything in its path. The only sound I could hear was my own breath, coming in short, rapid gasps. But the creature didn't move. It just stood there, as still as the fog itself. And then it did something that made my blood run cold. It made a sound. It was low, almost like a growl, but not quite. It was like something far deeper, more primal. And just as quickly as it had appeared, it started to back away, vanishing into the mist like it was never there. I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for any sign of movement. But nothing came. The mist had swallowed it whole. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I finally stumbled back inside the house, locking every door behind me, making sure the windows were shut tight. I felt like I was suffocating, like something was pressing down on me. For the rest of the night, I sat awake, the camera still in my hands, too afraid to sleep. I kept replaying what I had seen in my head, over and over. I kept hearing that growl, that unsettling sound, and the way it had just disappeared into the fog without a trace. But here's the thing. The next morning, when I checked the camera, I saw something that chilled me to my core. There was a video file, but it wasn't what I expected. The screen was black for most of it. The footage was shaky, just like I remembered, but there were moments when I could make out shapes in the fog. And then, right at the end of the footage, when the creature vanished into the mist, something else appeared. A figure. It was just standing there, watching me. It was tall, far taller than any man I'd ever seen. It had no features, no face, no body, just a dark silhouette that loomed in the corner of the screen. I didn't even realize I had stopped breathing until the video ended, and my chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of what I had just seen. I didn't know what to do. Who could I tell? Who would believe me? I was already the crazy guy who claimed he saw a three-legged monster. Now this. I showed the video to a few people, but no one believed me. They said it was a glitch or a trick of the light. Some even joked that it was just a mist playing with my mind. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what I felt. And now, I'm left wondering, was it just the creature I had seen before? Or was something else out there in the mist, watching, waiting for me to come closer? I don't know if I'll ever find out, but I'm never going back to that house. Not after what I saw, not after that figure. And if you ask anyone around here, they'll tell you, something is out there, watching. It hasn't been seen again. But sometimes, on foggy nights, when the mist rolls in thick and heavy, I can feel it watching me, just beyond the edge of the trees. And I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting for the right moment to show itself again. After I saw that figure on the footage, I couldn't bring myself to show anyone else. The way it stood there, motionless, almost as though it was aware of the camera, made me feel exposed, vulnerable. How could I explain it? The town would only brush it off as my mind playing tricks. Even the police had dismissed the whole thing, so why would anyone else take me seriously? But the more I thought about it, the more I started to question everything. The figure in the video, the strange creature in the yard, the feeling of being watched, it all began to blur together. Was it the same thing? Was it possible that whatever I had seen out there wasn't just some wild animal, but something else entirely? I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop feeling like it was still there, somewhere, waiting for me to slip up. The longer I stayed in Briarwood, the more oppressive the silence felt. The house, which had always been so quiet and peaceful, felt wrong. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like it was someone else's footsteps. Every shadow cast by the trees outside seemed to stretch unnaturally, growing taller and longer with each passing hour. I tried to distract myself, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, that the fog had gotten to my head. But then one afternoon, I decided to take a walk down to the woods behind my property. I had avoided going there for the past few weeks, too afraid of what might be lurking among the trees. But something inside me told me I had to check. Maybe there was an explanation after all. The woods behind my house were dense, tangled with overgrown vines and thick underbrush. It was easy to get lost back there if you weren't careful, which is why I never ventured far. The path that led through the trees was narrow and winding, but today, for some reason, it felt wider, less oppressive, like the forest itself was opening up to me. I walked for what felt like hours, my thoughts scattered, my steps slow and deliberate. Every now and then I thought I heard something, branches snapping, leaves rustling. But when I turned around, there was nothing. The woods were completely still. But then, just as I was about to turn back, I saw something. At first, it was just a shape in the distance, barely visible through the thick trees. It was too far away to make out clearly, but there was something familiar about it. Something about the way it moved that made my blood run cold. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer, straining my eyes to see. It was standing just beyond a large cluster of trees. The same twisted, jerky movements, 3 legs bent in strange angles. Its eyes, those haunting, glowing red eyes, staring right at me. I froze. My feet felt like they were glued to the ground. I didn't know what to do. If I ran, it might follow. If I stayed, it might approach. And then, just like before, it vanished into the woods. I didn't stay to see where it went. I didn't want to. My legs were already carrying me back toward the house before I even realized it. I stumbled over roots, barely keeping my footing, my heart pounding in my chest as the creature's image replayed over and over in my mind. What the hell was that thing? Why was it following me? And why couldn't I escape it? I didn't go back to the woods after that. I locked myself inside my house, the blinds drawn tight, the doors bolted shut. It was as if everything I had known before, the quiet town, the peaceful life, had slipped away, replaced by a constant, oppressive fear. For a week, I didn't leave the house. I didn't even go outside to check the yard. I just stayed in, waiting for whatever was out there to make its move. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I wasn't safe. One night, I sat on the couch in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. The clock on the mantel ticked slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. My mind wandered, thinking of all the strange things that had happened. The creature, the figure in the video, the whispers in the fog, but nothing made sense. I kept asking myself, was I going crazy? Was I imagining all of this? And that's when it happened again. There was a knock on the door. It was soft, barely audible at first, but it was there. A knock. Just one. Then another. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. Who could it be? The police? One of my neighbors? Or was it... I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to see what was on the other side of that door. But then it came again. A third knock. Louder this time, almost as though it was getting impatient. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked slowly toward the door. I didn't know what to expect, but I had to look. Maybe it was just someone messing around. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I cracked the door open, just a little, peering through the crack. There was nothing there. No one. But there was something on the ground in front of the door. It was a footprint. Not a regular footprint, though. It was wrong. It was larger than any human footprint I had ever seen, and it was distorted, as if the creature had been standing on 3 legs, pressing its weight down in the dirt. But the most disturbing part? It had 6 toes. I backed away, my heart racing. I slammed the door shut, locking it immediately. What the hell was going on? Why was it leaving me messages? Why was it targeting me? That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I stayed up, staring at the door, listening for any more knocks. but there were no more sounds, no more signs of the creature. The next morning, I went outside to look at the footprint. It was still there, clear as day, but there was something else now. More footprints. They trailed off toward the woods, as though it had been pacing around my house, waiting for me to notice. I followed the trail with my eyes, my stomach sinking as I realized that the footprints led straight into the woods. I didn't go after them. I didn't dare. And so, the days passed. The creature never came back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I received a letter. It was an envelope with no return address, just my name written in neat block letters. Inside, there was a single piece of paper. It was stained with something, and at first I thought it was just dirt. But then, when I touched it, I realized it was wet and sticky. The note read, "I see you. You can't hide. The mist will find you. I still don't know who sent it. I don't know if it was from the creature or from someone who knew what had been happening. But the message was clear. I'm not safe, and I'm not alone. The creature may have disappeared from Briarwood for now, but it's out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. And when the fog rolls in again, I know it will be back." As days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me. The letter with the strange message, "I see you. You can't hide. The mist will find you," had left a dark mark on my mind. It was the kind of thing you could only read once and never forget. Every time I looked outside, I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me. The small town of Briarwood had always felt safe, isolated, even peaceful. But now, it seemed like the town itself had become an extension of the creature that haunted my every thought. The misty mornings, the rustling of the trees just beyond my yard, the unsettling creaks of my house at night. It was all a constant reminder that I was no longer in control of my own life. The creature, or whatever it was, seemed to be everywhere, following me without a single sound. I couldn't stop thinking about the footprints. 6 toes. What kind of animal or thing left a print like that? I spent hours researching, scouring the internet, looking for any similar cases. Nothing. Nothing like it. No creature with that kind of foot, no legend, no myth that fit what I was seeing. It was like the thing didn't belong here, like it came from somewhere else entirely. But the more I thought about it, the less it seemed to matter. It wasn't from some far-off place. It was here, right in my own backyard. It was a week after receiving the letter that I decided I needed to confront whatever this thing was. I couldn't live in fear anymore. I had to know what it wanted, if I could stop it, or if it was something beyond human comprehension. It had been silent for a while now. Too quiet, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to face it. I spent the evening preparing myself. I made sure I had a flashlight, a camera to document whatever I saw, and a baseball bat for protection. If it was an animal, I could defend myself. If it was something else, well, I wasn't sure what I was going to do then. But the longer I waited, the harder it became to stay inside. It was late, well past midnight, when I finally stepped out the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. The air outside was thick with fog, rolling in from the woods like a tide. The mist had never been this dense before, and it sent a chill crawling down my spine. It was impossible to see more than a few feet in front of me, but I pressed on, walking cautiously toward the edge of the property, where the woods began. I stopped just at the tree line, straining my eyes against the fog. The night was eerily silent. No sounds of animals, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive, suffocating quiet. I didn't know if I was expecting to see it again, or if I just hoped I wouldn't. But as I stood there, my flashlight sweeping across the fog, I saw something. It wasn't much at first, just a flash of movement through the mist. But it was enough. My blood ran cold. I froze, trying to steady my breath, trying to gather the courage to move forward. And then I saw it clearly. A shape, tall, hunched, moving in the fog with that same jerky, unsteady gait. 3 legs, twisted and unnatural. Those glowing red eyes, glaring through the mist, locking onto me as though it knew I was there, watching it. The creature was real. It was real, and it was standing in front of me. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. But time didn't seem to matter anymore. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the ground, and then it took a step toward me. Slowly, deliberately. I snapped out of my paralysis, turning to run. My feet hit the ground hard, my body moving faster than I thought was possible. I could hear it behind me, its odd, shifting footsteps getting closer and closer. I dared not look back, but I could feel it, feel its presence, feel the heat of its breath just behind me. I was almost back to the house when I felt something strange, a sharp pain in my side. I stumbled, falling forward onto the grass just in front of the porch. My breath was ragged, my heart thudding in my chest as I struggled to push myself back up. And then I heard it, a soft, sickening sound, like a dry crackling, like bones grinding together. The creature was close. I could feel it watching me from the edge of the yard, its eyes boring into the back of my skull. I finally made it inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it with trembling hands. My legs felt like jelly as I sank to the floor, my mind racing with fear and confusion. What was it? What did it want? I didn't dare go back outside. I stayed in that house, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of what had happened. But nothing made sense. The creature had been right there, right in front of me, but now it was gone. The mist, the woods, the strange footprints, all of it remained unanswered, unresolved. Over the next few days, things started to change. I didn't sleep. Not really. I couldn't. The nightmares started, and they were worse than I ever could have imagined. I would dream that I was back outside, in the woods, watching as the creature circled me. It would never speak, but I could feel its hatred, its hunger, just waiting for me to make the wrong move. I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, only to realize that the creature was still out there, somewhere, watching. I told myself it was just the stress, just the fear, but then things started happening. Strange things, little things that I couldn't ignore. It started with the mirrors. I would look into them, and for a split second, I'd see something in the reflection, a shadow, a flicker of movement. But when I turned around, there would be nothing there. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but it kept happening. Every mirror, every window, there was something in the reflection, just behind me, always there, always watching. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I looked into the mirror above the fireplace. It was a large, antique mirror that had been in the house for years. But as I stared into it, I saw something that made my stomach turn. There, in the reflection, standing just behind me in the doorway, was the creature. I whipped around, but no one was there. The room was empty, but the reflection was still there. The creature stood behind me, its glowing red eyes burning into mine. I don't remember how I left the house that night. All I know is that I didn't go back. I couldn't. The creature, or whatever it was, had found me, and it wouldn't stop until it had me. I left Briarwood for good, and I never returned. But sometimes when the fog rolls in, I wonder if it's still there, waiting, watching, waiting for the next person to see what I saw. I don't know where it came from, and I don't know what it wants. But I know this, whatever it is, it's still out there, and it's always watching. If you are currently enjoying this story, pause the video, and please subscribe to the Horror Shack, and make sure you like this video, and leave us a comment saying I am enjoying the story, as this would help us get feedback, and also encourage us to tell more true spine-chilling stories like this one. Story 2, The Echo Hollow Monster by Elena. I'll never forget the first time I heard about the Echo Hollow Inn. It wasn't in a ghost story or some dramatic documentary. It came up during a conversation with a stranger at a bus stop, a disheveled older man with wild eyes who smelled faintly of alcohol. He leaned toward me as I sat scrolling through my phone and said, "You ever been to Echo Hollow? It's the kind of place that fixes you, or breaks you. Depends on what you bring with you." At first, I just laughed it off. People say all kinds of strange things, but his words stuck with me. The way he said it, it wasn't casual. It was like he knew something I didn't. Months later, when life had me at rock bottom, I remembered those words. I don't need to go into all the details, but let's just say I was looking for a way out. Not a way out of life, exactly, but out of the weight pressing on me every single day. My sister's death had taken everything out of me, and I was desperate for something, anything, to make me feel alive again. That's how I found myself on the road to Echo Hollow. Have you ever felt like you're being pulled somewhere? Like some invisible force is guiding you even though you don't fully understand why? That's how it felt driving up that winding mountain road. The air got colder with every mile, and the fog rolled in so thick I had to slow down to a crawl just to see the curves ahead. When I finally saw the inn, it almost felt like I had stepped back in time. The building loomed at the edge of a cliff, its pointed towers and arched windows half hidden behind gnarled trees. The paint was peeling, and the roof sagged in places, but there was something oddly beautiful about it too. It felt like the kind of place that had a story, a long, complicated story. The parking lot was empty, except for an old pickup truck covered in leaves. That should have been a warning sign, but I told myself it was just part of the charm. Maybe this place wasn't exactly on the tourist trail anymore, but that just made it better for someone like me who wanted solitude. The front door was heavy, the kind that creaks when you push it open. The lobby was, well, I don't really know how to describe it. It was big, with high ceilings and a chandelier that might have been fancy 100 years ago. Now it was just dusty, with a few missing crystals. The wallpaper was faded, and there was a smell I couldn't quite place, like old wood and something faintly metallic. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a floral blouse that looked like it belonged in the same era as the hotel. Her smile was friendly, but her eyes, I don't know, they felt like they were watching me a little too closely. "You must be Elena," she said before I could even introduce myself. That stopped me in my tracks. "How did you?" "Only one reservation today," she said, cutting me off like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I brushed it off. Small towns are like that sometimes. People know more than you expect them to. The room she gave me was on the second floor, at the very end of the hallway. "You'll have the best view in the whole place," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And she was right. The window in my room looked out over the gorge, with the mountains stretching endlessly in the distance. It was breathtaking, but also a little unnerving. The cliff's edge felt so close. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. You know how sometimes silence can be louder than noise? That's how it felt in the Echo Hollow Inn. Even the wind outside seemed muted, and the usual creaks and groans of an old building were missing. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering why the place felt so heavy. The next morning, I went downstairs to explore. The lobby had a side door that led to a library, or maybe it was a sitting room. The walls were lined with shelves, and the books all looked ancient, like the kind of books no one actually reads anymore. A few photo albums sat on one of the tables, so I flipped through them out of curiosity. They were filled with black and white pictures of people who had stayed at the inn over the years. At first, it was kind of fascinating, a glimpse into the past. But then I started noticing something strange. In almost every picture, the people were standing by the balcony overlooking the gorge. And in some of the photos, their faces were blurred, like they were moving when the picture was taken. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just old film or bad lighting. But then I turned to the last page of one album, and my stomach dropped. There was a photo of a woman standing by the railing, looking straight at the camera. Her face was clear, but her eyes, I don't even know how to describe it. They looked hollow, like she wasn't really there. I shut the album and put it back on the table, telling myself I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. But later that night, I heard something that made me question everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing these faint sounds. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't. It was softer, like whispering. The kind of sound you can't really place, but you know it's there. At first, I tried to ignore it. Old buildings make weird noises, right? Pipes rattle, wood creaks, the wind sneaks through cracks. But this wasn't like that. It felt deliberate, like it was happening just to get my attention. I turned on the bedside lamp and sat up, trying to convince myself I wasn't losing it. That's when I noticed something odd. The mirror on the dresser across the room. It was foggy, like someone had just breathed on it, but I hadn't been anywhere near it. I got up to check, thinking maybe there was a draft. When I wiped the glass with my sleeve, I saw it. A handprint. Not just any handprint, though. It was small, like a child's hand, and it was inside the glass, as if someone had pressed their palm from the other side of the mirror. My stomach tightened. I told myself it must have been there all along, that I just hadn't noticed it before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I went back to bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling, refusing to look at the mirror again. The whispering stopped after a while, or maybe I was just too exhausted to hear it anymore. Either way, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I decided to distract myself by exploring more of the inn. Staying cooped up in my room wasn't doing me any favors. The hallways were eerily quiet, like I was the only person in the whole building. I passed by a few doors, all of them shut tight. I remember wondering if there were any other guests, or if I really was alone. As I made my way downstairs, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, with a dim light spilling out from the crack. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed it open. Inside was a small office, cluttered with papers and old photographs. There was a ledger on the desk, its leather cover cracked with age. I flipped it open, expecting to see a list of guest names, but what I found was unsettling. The names were written in neat, looping handwriting, but every so often, one would be crossed out with thick, black ink. Next to some of the crossed out names were dates. Always just a day or two after the person had checked in. I ran my finger down the list, feeling a growing sense of dread. Near the bottom of the page, I saw something that made my heart stop. My name. It was written in the same elegant handwriting, with today's date listed next to it. I slammed the book shut and backed out of the room, my hands shaking. The rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every distant sound, it all felt wrong. That evening, I decided to leave. Whatever peace I'd been hoping to find here, it wasn't worth this creeping sense of dread. But when I tried to check out, the woman at the front desk just smiled at me in that unnerving way of hers. "Leaving so soon?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think I need to cut my trip short." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said. "What do you mean?" "We have a strict policy," she replied, her tone as sweet as honey. "Once you check in, you can't leave until your stay is complete." My chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "You'll see," she said, and before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing through a door behind the counter. That night, I locked my door and pushed the dresser in front of it for good measure. I don't know what I thought that would accomplish, but it made me feel a little safer. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in bed with my back against the headboard, clutching my phone like it was some kind of lifeline. Around midnight, I heard it again, the whispering. But this time, it wasn't faint. It was loud enough that I could make out words. though they didn't make any sense. It sounded like a chant. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on my door. I froze, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. No answer. The knock came again, louder this time. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table, holding it like a weapon as I crept toward the door. When I looked through the peephole, my blood ran cold. There was no one there. But when I turned back toward the room, I saw the balcony door was open. My knees buckled as I stared at the open balcony door, swaying slightly in the cold night breeze. I knew for a fact I hadn't unlocked it. I had checked, double-checked, and even jammed a chair beneath the handle earlier. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest as I stood there, frozen. For a moment, I debated my options. Running for the front door wasn't one of them. My gut told me I wouldn't get far, especially not with whatever was happening here. Instead, I gripped the lamp tighter, slowly inching toward the balcony door. The curtains fluttered in the wind, and I could see the dark outline of the gorge beyond. The air was biting cold, far colder than it should have been for this time of year. As I reached the door frame, I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door shut and pretend I'd imagined it all. But another part, the part that knew I wasn't imagining anything, urged me to step outside. And that's when I heard it, a voice. It was faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. "Elena." I stumbled back, my breath hitching. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but hearing my name like that, out here, in this place, made my skin crawl. I scanned the balcony, my eyes darting to every corner, but it was empty. The voice came again, this time clearer. "Elena, come closer." It was coming from the gorge. I felt the pull immediately. It wasn't physical, but it was undeniable, like an invisible thread tied to my chest, tugging me forward. My mind screamed at me to stop, to retreat back into the room and barricade the door, but my feet shuffled forward anyway. As I neared the edge of the balcony, I saw something that made me gasp. There was a figure standing at the edge of the gorge, right where the mist was thickest. It was hard to make out any details, but the shape was human. "Elena, it's me," the voice said. My stomach dropped. The voice was familiar now, achingly so. It sounded like my sister, Clara, who had died 3 years ago. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, this isn't real. It's me," the voice insisted. "I've been waiting for you." I clutched the railing, my knuckles turning white. My rational mind fought to make sense of the situation, but I was losing the battle. "You left me," the voice said, and my chest tightened. "You left me, Elena, but you can make it right. Just come closer." Tears streamed down my face. Memories of Clara flooded my mind. Her laugh, her smile, the way she had always looked up to me. And then the memory I tried so hard to suppress. The night she called me, begging me to come over because she couldn't do this alone. I hadn't gone. The guilt had eaten me alive ever since, and now it was standing right in front of me, pulling me toward the edge. "Elena," the voice said again, more insistent this time. "It's okay. Just let go. You'll be with me again." My legs felt weak, my head spinning. I leaned over the railing, squinting at the figure in the mist. "Clara," I whispered. The figure didn't move. "You don't have to carry the pain anymore," it said. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold onto the railing. "I'm sorry," I choked out. "I'm so sorry." The figure stepped closer, its features becoming clearer. It looked like Clara, her face, her hair, even the way she stood, but something wasn't right. Her eyes were too dark, like twin voids, and her smile was off. "Elena, come to me," it said, holding out a hand. I nearly did it. I nearly climbed over that railing, ready to let go of everything. But then I heard something else, a chorus of voices, faint but growing louder. "Don't." I whipped around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was no one there. The voices came again, this time all around me. "Don't listen to it. Elena, stop." I clapped my hands over my ears, shaking my head. The conflicting voices were overwhelming, each pulling me in a different direction. The figure in the mist grew angry, its soothing tone replaced with something harsher. "You're mine, Elena," it screamed, its voice no longer sounding like Clara's. I stumbled back, tripping over the chair I'd used to block the door earlier. As I hit the ground, the balcony door slammed shut on its own. I don't remember how long I lay there, shaking and crying. By the time I got up, the room was eerily quiet again. I wanted to leave, but I knew the woman at the front desk wouldn't let me. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I could make it out of the inn alive. Instead, I grabbed the journal I'd found earlier and started flipping through it again, desperate for answers. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There, scrawled on the last page, was a single sentence. "The balcony isn't the end. It's just the beginning." The words on the page blurred as I stared at them, my hands trembling. The balcony isn't the end. It's just the beginning. What did that even mean? My pulse thundered in my ears as I read the sentence over and over, trying to make sense of it. I felt a strange pull, the same invisible thread as before, as though the journal itself wanted me to turn the page. But there were no more pages. The journal ended there, the rest of it blank except for faint indentations of writing. Words that had been scribbled over were erased. Desperate, I ran my fingers over the grooves, feeling the jagged texture beneath my fingertips. I glanced around the room, my instincts screaming that I wasn't alone. The air felt heavier, thicker, like the walls themselves were closing in. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, shifting ever so slightly, as if they were watching. I shoved the journal into my bag and stood, bracing myself against the bedpost. My legs felt unsteady, like I had just run a marathon. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. The library. It was the only place in the inn that seemed to hold any clues. Those journals, the photographs. Surely there was something there that could help me understand what was happening. The hallway was darker than before, the flickering bulbs barely giving off enough light to see. Each step I took felt like a thunderclap, the sound echoing endlessly. I clutched the bag against my chest, scanning the corridor for any sign of movement. The library door was ajar, just as I'd left it earlier. I slipped inside and flipped the light switch, but nothing happened. My stomach sank as I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, casting long, eerie shadows across the room. The library was just as I remembered. Rows of old, mismatched bookshelves, journals piled haphazardly on tables, and the faint, musty smell of decaying paper. I approached the shelf where I'd found the first journal, my eyes darting from one spine to another. Most of them looked like they hadn't been touched in decades, their leather bindings cracked and faded. But one journal caught my eye. It was newer than the others, its cover a stark contrast to the faded times around it. I pulled it from the shelf, my fingers tingling as though the book itself was alive. The first few pages were blank, but as I flipped further, I came across a name written in shaky, uneven letters. Caroline, 1998. A chill ran down my spine. That was the name I'd seen earlier in the guest book, the one with "never checked out" scrawled next to it. The entries were short, fragmented, as if Caroline had been writing in a hurry. I came here to find peace, to escape everything. But something is wrong. I can feel it watching me. The next page was smeared. The ink running like water had been spilled over it. Only a few words were legible. The balcony. It shows you things you can't unsee. I turned the page again, my breath catching. The final entry wasn't written in ink. It was carved into the paper, the letters deep and jagged. Don't trust the voices. They lie. They always lie. A loud creak made me whip around, my phone's flashlight swinging wildly. The library door had closed, though I was sure I'd left it open. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. Silence. I took a step toward the door, but the floorboards beneath me groaned, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. And then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, coming from the far corner of the library. "Elena." The voice sent a jolt of terror through me, and I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of journals. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Elena, you can't leave." I pointed my flashlight toward the corner, but there was nothing there, just the empty space where the shadows seemed to writhe and twist unnaturally. My heart pounded as I backed toward the door, clutching the journal like a lifeline. As I reached for the doorknob, the voice came again, louder, more insistent. "Elena, stay with us." The lights flickered violently, and for a split second, I saw them. Faces in the shadows, pale and hollow-eyed, their mouths twisted in grotesque smiles. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I yanked the door open and bolted down the hallway, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. The walls seemed to stretch and warp around me, the air growing colder with every step. By the time I reached my room, I was gasping for breath. I slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing my back against the wood. My hand was shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the journal. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, sent my nerves into overdrive. I sat on the bed, the journal open in my lap, reading and rereading Caroline's words. What did she mean by "the balcony shows you things"? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that she was trying to warn me? As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't stay here another night. Whatever was happening at the Echo Hollow Inn, I wanted no part of it. But as I packed my bag, something in the back of my mind nagged at me. The pull I'd felt last night, the figure in the mist, it wasn't just coincidence. This place, this inn, wanted something from me, and I wasn't sure I could leave without giving it what it wanted. I barely noticed the weight of the journal in my bag as I slung it over my shoulder and crept toward the door. Every step felt like I was walking against an invisible current, a force subtly resisting my movements. It was as if the walls themselves didn't want me to leave. The hallway stretched out before me, unnaturally long and dim, the flickering bulbs overhead casting shifting shadows on the floor. My heart raced as I clutched the doorknob, ready to make my escape. But the moment I twisted it, a sharp, icy pain shot up my hand. I yanked it back instinctively and stared. The knob was slick, wet, not with water, but with something darker, something that clung to my skin like tar. My breath caught as I wiped it on my jeans, only for the stain to vanish as if it had never been there. Panic clawed at my chest. I stepped back, my eyes darting to the end of the hallway. I didn't know where I was going, but staying in that room wasn't an option. I ran. The inn was different now. The familiar layout from the day before had twisted into something unrecognizable. Corridors I swore I'd walked down stretched endlessly, looping back into themselves like a labyrinth. Doors led to nowhere, some opening to blank walls, others to rooms filled with rotting furniture and a pervasive, cloying smell that made my stomach churn. And then there were the whispers. They started softly, almost imperceptibly, like a breeze brushing against my ears. But as I moved deeper into the inn, they grew louder, overlapping and chaotic. "Elena, stay. You belong here." My name echoed from every direction, spoken in voices I almost recognized. A child's giggle, an older woman's rasp, a man's deep, commanding tone. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The voices weren't coming from outside. They were inside me, threading through my thoughts like parasites. The corridor ended abruptly at a door I hadn't seen before. It was massive, made of dark wood with an ornate brass handle shaped like a coiled serpent. My stomach turned at the sight of it, but the pull was back, stronger than ever. Someone was behind that door. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the handle. The whispers were louder now, frenzied and urgent. Some begged me to leave, while others coaxed me forward. "Elena, it's time. You can't fight this. Don't open it." A sudden crash behind me made me jump. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping over the corridor, but it was empty. When I turned back, the door was ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling into the hallway. The room beyond was vast and cold, its high ceilings disappearing into shadows. A single window overlooked the gorge, the early morning light barely illuminating the space. But it wasn't empty. In the center of the room stood a figure, its back to me. My breath hitched as I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight trembling in my hand. "Hello." The figure didn't move. It was dressed in tattered clothes, its shoulders hunched as if weighed down by something unseen. I swallowed hard and stepped closer. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure shifted slightly, just enough for me to see the side of its face. My blood ran cold. It was me, or at least it looked like me. The same hair, the same clothes, even the same bag slung over its shoulder. But its eyes, those weren't mine. They were empty, black voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. It smiled, a grotesque, unnatural stretch of its lips, and whispered in a voice that wasn't quite mine. "You've already been here, Elena. You just don't remember." I stumbled back, the flashlight slipping from my grasp and clattering to the floor. The room plunged into darkness, but the figure remained, its silhouette somehow more defined in the absence of light. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The figure stepped toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. "Do you know why you're here?" it asked, its voice dripping with mockery. "You thought you came to escape, to find peace. But you were called, just like the others." I backed into the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The room seemed to shift around me, the walls closing in, the air growing heavier with each passing second. "You can't leave," it continued. "Not until you've paid the price." "What price?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure tilted its head, its smile widening. "The one you owe." A sudden rush of images flooded my mind. The journals, the balcony, the faces in the shadows. And then something else, memories I didn't recognize, but that felt achingly familiar. A man's voice pleading, a hand reaching out, desperate, and my own voice, cold and unyielding, saying, "I can't do this." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't my first time at the Echo Hollow Inn. I had been here before, long ago, and I had left someone behind. Who was he? I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The figure leaned in close, its breath icy against my skin. "You already know the answer." The door behind me slammed shut, and the room began to dissolve, the walls crumbling into darkness. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure's face, its grin stretching impossibly wide as it whispered one final word. "Welcome." The darkness wasn't just around me, it was inside me. It felt alive, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't see, couldn't move, couldn't even tell if I was still breathing. The void pressed in on every side, squeezing out every thought, an ounce of strength I had left. And then, faintly, I heard it, a rhythmic thudding, like the sound of a heartbeat. But it wasn't mine. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the Echo Hollow Inn anymore. Or maybe I still was. It was hard to tell. The air was thick with fog, and everything around me was bathed in a pale, unnatural light. The ground beneath my feet felt solid but gave slightly, like damp earth. Ahead of me stood the balcony. The last look. It jutted out over the gorge, its edges crumbling and frayed. Beyond it, the mist parted just enough to reveal the drop below. It seemed endless, an abyss that devoured the light. And I wasn't alone. Figures moved in the fog, their forms barely visible. They didn't walk so much as drift, their heads bowed, their hands reaching for something unseen. Whispers rose around me, a mournful, wordless hymn that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Elena, I froze. The voice wasn't coming from the figures. It was coming from the gorge. I don't know why I moved toward the balcony. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to run. But something about that voice pulled me forward. It was familiar, achingly so. As I stepped onto the balcony, the boards groaned beneath my weight. The mist swirled, parting just enough for me to see the edge clearly. And standing there at the very brink was a man. He was facing away from me, his shoulders slumped. His clothes were soaked and torn, and his hands hung limply at his sides. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man didn't respond. Slowly, he turned to face me, and my heart stopped. It was him. The memories came rushing back, sharper and more painful than I could have imagined. His name was Michael. He was someone I loved, someone I had abandoned when he needed me most. I had left him at his lowest, too afraid to face his pain, too consumed by my own fears to help him. And he had come here. "Michael," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry. I didn't. You left me." His voice was hollow, empty. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on mine. They weren't the eyes I remembered. They were black, void of life, and filled with a sadness so deep it threatened to consume me. "I didn't mean to," I pleaded. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do." "You knew," he said, his voice growing louder. "You always knew, and you chose to leave." The ground beneath us began to tremble. The mist thickened, swirling around us like a living thing. The figures in the fog stopped moving, their heads turning toward us in unison. "You brought me here," Michael said, his voice echoing. "You brought all of us here." I stumbled back, shaking my head. "No, I didn't. I didn't mean to." "You made the promise," he interrupted, his voice a thunderous roar. "You promised to stay, to help, and you broke it." The figures in the fog began to move again, drifting closer. Their faces were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow. They reached out to me, their whispers growing louder, overlapping into a deafening cacophony. "Stay. Join us. You can't leave." I turned to run, but the balcony was gone. The inn was gone. Everything was gone except the mist, the figures, and the abyss. Michael stepped closer, his hand outstretched. "It's time, Elena. Time to pay the price." The abyss yawned open behind me, its pull irresistible. I tried to fight it, tried to hold on to something, anything, but there was nothing left. The last thing I saw was Michael's face, his expression softening, almost sad. "You could have saved me," he said. "You could have saved us all." And then I fell. When I woke up, I was back in the Echo Hollow Inn. The room was exactly as it had been when I first arrived, pristine, inviting, normal. But I wasn't alone. A woman stood by the window, her back to me. She turned slowly, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was me. No, not me. Not exactly. She smiled, a faint, knowing smile, and gestured toward the door. "It's time," she said. The door creaked open, revealing a long, dim hallway. And at the end of it, I saw someone stepping into the inn, their face pale and weary, their eyes filled with grief. A new guest. I understood then. I wasn't leaving. None of us were. We were part of the inn now, bound to it by our broken promises, our unresolved pain. And it was my turn to guide the next lost soul to their end. As the door closed behind the new guest, I heard the faint echo of the whispers. "Elena, stay. You belong here." And I knew they were right. If you actually enjoyed these stories, please subscribe and leave us a comment to the next horror story you'll want us to tell. Till then, see you in the next one.